this is going to be a long, house by house, even room by room fight. And if Hamas oppose it, it could go on for weeks.
Let's talk about the ground offensive and what's happening at the moment. Israeli forces say that they've encircled Gaza City and they are preparing to enter it. What might that look like? There are several complexities to this, aren't there? When you think about, potentially more lives lost, how do they find those hostages? How do they navigate further into the tunnels network? How do you see this?
I think the place to start is with the geography. So Gaza City in the northern half of Gaza is about 4 kilometers by 5 kilometers. It's a densely built up area, previously home to about 600,000 people. And it seems that somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 Palestinian civilians are still there. The Israeli military believe that Hamas leadership is in Gaza City, and that is the heart of the organization they are trying to break. And then we need to be absolutely clear that ever since the 7th of October, Israel has been completely consistent in saying that its objective is to destroy Hamas, and everything else is proven to be less important. So damage to the civilian infrastructure, of course, more than 11,000 munitions dropped on Gaza so far. Civilian casualties, Israel regrets, although we should remember that on both sides of this war, there are elements that regard their opponent as something less than human, and that is always dangerous as well as tragic. So what we're going to see is the Israeli Defense Force, now that it's encircled Gaza City, fighting into this densely built up area. And a lot will now depend on what does Hamas do? Do they present a stiff fight or do they slip away? We know the Israeli forces will not go into the tunnels. They've been told not to. They will blow them up. And in a densely built up area, the Israeli advantages in air power and artillery are much reduced, especially if they are quite discriminate about it. So this is going to be a long, house by house, even room by room fight. And if Hamas oppose it, it could go on for weeks.
And could we see, in terms of ground warfare, could this be the most intensive that we've seen yet?
Oh, for sure. So on Friday, Prime Minister Netanyahu said they were approaching the height of the battle. And everything they've done over the last 11 days of this ground operation, indeed many things they did with the air operation before, is about setting the conditions on the ground for this assault of Gaza City. So we are coming to, by far, the hardest fight in this war to date.
Several countries have either overtly or leaned into criticism of the intensity of the military operation. We know that so many thousand lives have been lost. The Hamas-run local health authority in Gaza says more than 10,000 Palestinian lives have been lost. And we must also remember that 1,400 Israelis were murdered by Hamas as well. On whatever side, fatalities are sadly an offshoot of war, but there is some control there possible by Israeli forces. Do you think, Richard, they'll work very hard at staying within international law, bearing in mind that several of these countries, the US, the UN, a lot of the European countries, that they are allies, certainly in terms of US and Europe, that they are allied countries, and that Israel must walk a tightrope, really, in terms of not alienating the support that they've had so far?
So you're absolutely right, is that the Israeli military are walking a tightrope. Their objective is the destruction of Hamas, and everything else is proven to be less important, not their own hostages, not the lives of the citizens of Gaza, if they're in the way of getting to Hamas. And the longer that Israel does that, and Israeli commanders, I think, are becoming much more aware of this, is a couple of things are likely to happen. First of all, more and more of global opinion that generally supports Israel, and more of global opinion that's ambivalent, will say this is too much. This is too high a price to pay in terms of death and destruction for a military objective which everybody knows cannot be achieved. There's no amount of force is going to destroy the idea of Hamas or kill every leader and foot soldier. And the second thing, and it's just as significant, is if Israel presses on too hard and the level of destruction continues, I think, in the way that we've seen it, more and more of the Arab street, of the populations of the region are going to demand of their rulers that something is done. And this could take us to the escalation to a regional conflict that nobody needs and nobody wants, but it may still be where we end up.
Look, I must ask you about the planned pro-Palestinian protests that will take place this weekend on Armistice Day, the day before Remembrance Sunday. Met Police have this afternoon asked the organisers, the Palestinian Solidarity campaign, not to protest, saying that the risk of violence and disorder linked to breakaway groups is growing. So there's no direct criticism there of the Palestinian Solidarity campaign, but what they point out is that, you know, people who don't have as noble a message will be taking advantage of that protest, and it'll all be done on a very sensitive weekend anyway. As a highly decorated serviceman, how do you feel about people protesting on Armistice Day?
So I'd be very sad because there is pretty much a national consensus in this country that the 11th of November is a national act of remembrance when the serving military and veterans and the many, many families in our country touched by war come together to remember the fallen and, frankly, to think about the folly and the cost of war. And it's a very good thing to do. It would, in my view, be a tragedy if that national act of remembrance was somehow ambushed by the demonstration in support of the people of Gaza, even though many veterans and others would recognize the depth of the feeling that the supporters of Gaza are bound to have in the current circumstances. So surely it would be better to do it at another time or on another day. Otherwise, the story is likely to be not about Gaza, but about the clash between the Remembrance Day parade and lots of veterans and the Gaza protest. And that I don't think is to anyone's benefit.
Do you think veterans might sort of show up to put the point across that this is a day of remembrance for members of our armed forces, not necessarily a day appropriate to protesting, no matter how important the message is behind the protest? The 11th of November, as you say, carries its own important message, and we should respect that. Do you think former servicemen, sort of might kind of, show up along the protest route to sort of make that point?
So I think most former service people, men and women, will act with great dignity and restraint. They will want the act of remembrance to be respected. They're clearly not going to be deterred. They're veterans. They are going to come for Remembrance Sunday, and they will, in a quiet way, maintain their ground. I think there's a bigger danger in that those groups, some of them fringe groups in our society that tend to support, in their minds anyway, the veterans and the armed forces might think it's their job to stand between the veterans and the police and the protesters. So none of this seems to me a clever thing to do. And really, let's just have separate occasions.